Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod BBQ podcast. I am your host, Mike Musto, and this is the first episode of 2022, the new year. Remember 2020, how that year was a complete hash and everybody just lost it because of COVID? And then 2021, which was like 3 days ago, that was also a mess because COVID came back and kicked the crap out of us. Well, now we're into 2022, and we don't know if COVID's going to kick the crap out of us again, but either way, we have a podcast and everybody can talk virtually, and that's what we're doing. So welcome to the show. Now, on this episode, we have Scott Smith from Harms Automotive. Now, and Robin Audi. Hi, Rob. I almost forgot you, but that's staring at your face, but you're here. The key with Scott is this. There are Mopar experts out there, and then there's Scott. If you could tell, if you're watching this on YouTube by what's sitting behind him, there's all shelves of crap. And there's the Nerdmobile, which is behind him. We're going to get into that a little bit later. But we brought Scott on, one, to talk about Mopars a little bit, and then two very special Mopars that we actually have on the Hemmings Auctions right now, which you guys are going to hear about in a few. But anyway, Rob, Scott, how y'all doing in 2022?
Great. Good to be
snowed in, but otherwise good.
Oh, snow.
Overrated.
It's definitely overrated.
It is. That's why I live in California. No snow. At least where I live in California. Northern guys, they're kind of screwed.
Western Washington does not clear snows. It snows nice in other parts of the country, but here it's just kind of a mess.
It's a mess. Well, what I want to talk about, there's a couple things. One, since this is going to be a full Mopar episode, Scott, I want to ask you, as you've been into Mopars for pretty much ever and are truly one of the Mopar experts out there, why and when did Mopars become so? Now, obviously, Rob's a Mopar guy. I'm a Mopar guy. When did you see a turn in Mopars? Because the late 70s and the early 80s and even the late 80s, nobody really wanted these cars. And then it almost seems like overnight somebody flipped a switch and it was like Mopars just went through the roof. Why did that happen?
Well, there's a lot of reasons that, contributed to that. But I think the biggest reason for Mopars being collectible over another brand is that they're very difficult to fake. There's, the broadcast sheets, the fender tags, the numbers on the drivetrains and the bodies and the VIN itself tell you what the car began life as. Whereas a Chevy, it's a little murkier than that. Mercury, excuse me. Murky. Need some more coffee. Anyway, they don't have as much paperwork, so you can fake a car easy. So a collector's not as confident in making a purchase decision without that backup paperwork and, something that tells it it's real. And that's one of the big things. Of course, back in the 80s, when the first rise in their values started to occur, I think it went back further than that when we saw the smog era cars taking over the world. And it was kind of depressing. As a kid in high school in the 80s, there was no new fast cars coming out this year. Now we have Hellcats and Red Eyes. Every year it gets better and faster. And back then it was the opposite. It was a 350 Chevy made 130 horsepower or some crazy thing. It was just nothing, right? So everybody was, struggling for something fun and fast to drive when you're a kid. And we look back in time at these muscle cars. And, a Hemi Cuda in 1980, you could buy one that was like brand new for $8,000 or $10,000. But what kid had $8,000 or $10,000 in 1980 in high school? You had $1,000, right? So you drove a Duster, or whatever you could buy, and you wished you had a Hemi Cuda. Well, 10 years later, now you're out of school, you're into your first job, you're making a little money, and now you can afford something that you always wanted. And so people look for these cars. And this happened in the late 80s, and we saw the first rise. The cars went from, Hemi Cuda was $10,000 and it went up to $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 in a few months. Of course, back then we didn't have the internet, so we didn't really track the prices or the values as quickly as we do now. It's a mere seconds before we know what something sold for. Back then it was a month before the new Hemmings Motor News came out we all looked at. So it was just a slower pace, but that's when we saw the first rise in our prices. And then, things stopped in the 90s for a while, and then in the early 2000s they took off like crazy again. It was just really kind of cyclical, but for the same reasons, just a new generation of people that wanted them.
Why do you think the Mopars, I mean, aside from the fact that they obviously harder to fake, you know, when you look at things from the muscle car era, you look at, you know, Camaros and Firebirds and GTOs and Grand Prix and all that other stuff. Why do you think they're so, I don't want to say undervalued, but undervalued as compared to Mopars in that regard, right? So like if you were to take a 68 Camaro and put it next to a 68 Charger, right? Odds are the Charger is going to bring higher money. Do you think that's a styling thing? Do you think that's more of an option thing, or do you think it's because there were just so few of them made in comparison to what GM had produced and Ford had produced?
I think you hit all those things. You know, it's pretty much first of all, if you ask automotive enthusiasts worldwide, you know, what was your favorite car? Just in the body style, you know, you've got the XKE Jaguar,
Sure.
68 Charger. You know, there's a few cars that everybody likes the shape of, let's say, and just for the artistic value, there's that.
Right.
But then Mopars were the third on the rung. They were the lowest produced cars, so there's fewer of them in the beginning, and there's fewer left now in good shape because they were treated like, you know, a redheaded stepkid and beat to death. And so they might have built 10,000 of something, but today there's only 2,000-3,000 left.
Right.
And we're all fighting over them, so the prices go up. Whereas Camaros, like a 69 Camaro, they built them for a year and a half. They literally made millions of them. So there's plenty out there to satisfy the demand. So the prices don't shoot up as much. They're easier to find. But even those are, you know, valuable now. So
Right.
there's really kind of a market for everything.
When it comes to the drivetrains, right? That's the one thing that I've always heard, and correct me if I'm wrong. You know, everybody always said that Mopar built the best drivetrains. Whether it's, you know, like the 727 was pretty bomb proof, you know, 8 3/4 Dana rear ends and stuff like that. Is that really true compared to a Ford 9-inch or, you know, a 12 bolt on a Chevy or something like that? Or is it really just come down to personal preference?
Well, I'm sure there's some bias in that. You know, someone told me once that the best Ford 9-inch didn't have any Ford parts in it. So, you know, you can take a Dana 60 that's 50 years old out of a used car and stick it in a drag car and probably never break it without touching anything. So, you know, there's certain attributes to those cars that were bulletproof. The, you know, the A33 transmissions were cast iron 4-speeds. They were pretty much indestructible with the factory horsepower they were offered with.
Right.
You know, nowadays you can put 1,000 horsepower in front of one and break it, but back then you couldn't. You know, so yeah, there's durability with their engines. We've all beat on some of the big blocks and small blocks, and like a 318 or a slant 6, they all seem to take it, you know, without losing their cookies. Whereas I've driven other makes that you couldn't say that for. So it's just a matter of your personal experience. But I think they did have a one-up on the engineering side.
So let me ask you, when did you get into Mopars, and how did you start to get into Mopars? Was it that's what you just gravitated to, or was there certain, I don't know, certain experience that you just said, you know what, I really kind of like this brand and what they represent and how they're manufactured, or what was the catalyst for you to get into this hobby?
Well, my grandfather owned a dealership, Chrysler Plymouth DeSoto dealership in the 40s and 50s. And he sold it in the early 60s and turned it into a bowling alley, but that's another story. But we always had, you know, Dodge trucks, and, you know, everything we drove was a Mopar. So I just sort of grew up with it. My father, Harmon Smith, which is where my company name Harms Automotive came from. When I was about 16, we moved to Vancouver, Washington from California. And, you know, I was getting into the, what's the coolest car, you know, the fastest car conversation with my dad. We're driving down the street in this pickup, and we pull up at a red light, and he's telling me about Richard Petty and the Daytona 500 in 1964 and the Hemis. And I didn't know what a Hemi was or anything he was talking about. And we pull up to the stoplight. This dude pulls up next to us in a 66 Satellite. It was a dark maroon color, gray-haired old guy, and it had a Hemi in it. And
really,
my dad said, that's it right there. And he pointed at the 426 emblem. He couldn't believe when pulled up, because even back then they're rare, you know. And this thing was like a brand new car. But I'm looking at it like, what's that old man car, you know? And
right.
Where like you know, the Nerdmobile behind me, it was the same type of car. And he said, oh no, that was that was the shot heard around the world when that engine came out. There was nothing that could touch it. Of course, you hear that from your father, and you believe every word out of his mouth when you're a kid. And so I bought into it, and from then on, I was a Mopar guy, and I always wanted a Hemi. And back in high school, of course, I couldn't afford one, but the desire was there, and I just kept after it.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I mean, you don't consider, at least, now we talk about Hellcats and things like that are making, 700, 800, 900 horsepower, whatever the case is. And we almost take it for granted, right? Because it really is the golden age of power. But if anybody has actually driven a real Hemi car, and I've been fortunate enough to drive a few of them, the horsepower was just so different back then. It was very mechanical. It was very raw. It was very visceral. Where today it just seems that it's very smooth power. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's
well, you got all these computers between you and the experience now too, right?
Yeah, you're more isolated from all that power now.
Yeah.
Back then it was, and the cars too. You're trying to steer a stagecoach down the road with 400 horsepower. I mean, they didn't have suspensions. The tires were nothing.
Yeah.
And you're basically herding the thing down the road and scared to death because the thing won't get traction and you're all over the road. And it took 400 horsepower to do that, back then. But yeah, it was a way different experience. You're more connected to the car and the road with the old stuff. That's what I remember anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I always tell everybody that I feel like everybody who's into muscle cars, whether it's a modern Hellcat or anything LS powered, Chevy or Mustangs or anything like that, that if they really want to feel what power is, and again, different kind of power, they need to get behind the wheel of a big block, old school 60s muscle car, because the experience is it is so different. And for anyone who's never driven it's mildly terrifying. It's exciting. It's fun. It's just all of those things. But like, I mean, the cars that I have are big block cars, and like I get out of those, and those still terrify me more than if I got into a new Hellcat.
Oh yeah.
Just because I feel like I could feel everything that's going on, and it's like I might die, something might fall off, like something might break, but it never does, which is great, But yeah, just different, just a different experience. Well, I wanted to ask you, because we've got a couple of cars up on the Hemmings auction right now that are actually super, super special cars, right? We have a super rare 1971 Plymouth Hemi Cuda in white with a 4-speed, which has got to be uber rare. And then we also we've got a beautiful orange 446 pack convertible car with a 4-speed. These are cars that I'm sure are like two of the, I guess you would call them blue chip cars, but are also very rare. Did things like these two cars, did this go back to the time where you could walk into a dealership and you could literally order a one-of-one car, right? Like, right? Because you can't do that now, and I don't think people understand that.
Well, back in the day, they had a different philosophy to sell cars. They wanted to give the buyer anything they wanted or leave out anything they wanted to get the price structure where they needed it to be. And so it went right down to the cigarette lighters. I mean, it literally did. So if you wanted, every car was a one of none. That gets played out a little too much,
right?
One thing, because there's so many of these cars. Every one is a little bit unique in some aspect. It just depends on how far you want to dive into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in general, I look at hard tops versus convertibles, 4-doors, etc., engine transmission combos. And, it kind of stops there for me. When you start mining deeper, it gets muddy, right? But when you wanted to order a car in 1970, 71, you could literally go out and you could pick the tires, you could pick the wheels, you could pick the seat covers, you could pick the types of seats, the steering wheels, the radios. There's several options for each aspect of the car. So it would be difficult to reproduce the same car just from memory. Even there's so many things. They'd sit down with a salesman and he'd start checking boxes, and they'd look at the price and he'd say, take off $20, and they'd find something to take off. It was like that. So a lot of unique cars were built that way.
That's really cool. And like I said, you have now when you go into a dealership, right, everything is an option package, right? You have your electronics group, or you have your winter package, or this package or that package.
Right.
And the fact that, I mean, Dodge is coming out with something, now where you could basically go in and kind of customize your car, but it's still not to the same exact level as it was back then.
No. Manufacturing efficiency has something to do with it.
Sure.
There's a cost savings by making all the cars the same way, or just 2 or 3 packages or whatever. So,
well, let me ask you this. So I want to go through both these cars because I think they're beautiful. Two, obviously they're both Cudas. I want to hit the white one first, the 71 Hemi Cuda 4-speed car. That is, honestly, I think this is the only one that I've ever seen in white. And the color is, it just works on this thing with the billboard
Especially
stripe.
with the billboards, yeah, and the black interior, it's just awesome.
Well, I've talked to a few people about I've seen a lot of the 71 Hemi Cudas that exist, and several of my friends have as well. And the number that gets talked around as far as 71 hardtop Hemi Cudas, there's just 2 or 3 that were white. They only built 48 of those cars, roughly 107 for U.S. consumption, and there were some export cars built. But it wasn't a color you see very often. And what I like about the 71 white in particular, the GW3 Snow White, is it's a really pure white. It's a beautiful white. A lot of whites have ivory and different colors in them. Mm-hmm. The Snow White is, I think, the best white Mopar ever produced in a year. It's a beautiful color.
And is that the actual color name of it, Snow White?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And so that aspect of the car is beautiful. It's very striking. And if you ever looked at one of the original factory service manuals and you flip through it, it'll show an underhood photograph of a car with, the engine and all the details. You'll notice the car is always white. And it shows off all the details in the engine really well. It's like a jewelry box for an engine.
Yeah.
So if you look at that white car and you pop the hood, that Hemi is just like, it just looks bigger. It's cool. It's like right there. It's all Hemi. All you see is engine. So I like that part of it a lot.
It's just it's a stunning car, especially when equipped with the shaker hood, the wood grain wheel, everything else. I mean, there's nothing about this thing that makes me go, no, this isn't the right car. It's
a numbers matching car with a very well established history to it too, right, Scott?
It is. And, it's unusual. 4-speed cars, they took a beating. People drove them hard. And a lot of those Hemis blew up. And they lost their numbers matching engine right away.
Yeah.
This particular car withstood that, and it didn't blow up, and it's still intact, and it's the original engine, never been damaged. I mean, it's really nice. And the other part of it that I like is that even though it's got billboards now, it didn't come with them. It was pure white. The 2 things that the owner added were the billboards, because he desired the billboards, and he added power steering because he drove the car around in tight spots in his shop, and he wanted to make sure he didn't bump into something. So, but otherwise, those are bolt-on things you can go either way with. 100% numbers matching. All of the documentation, 2 broadcast sheets, all the body numbers, original sheet metal, all the things people want, the full ownership history. So, we went back to how do you verify a car? Well, if you know all the owners, you can trace it back to brand new.
Sure.
That's the best, validation you could ever have, really. Forget the paperwork. But it's just one of those cars that checks all the boxes.
So because it's such a rare car, and because there were so few made in this color combination, and this is where I kind of go back and forth, is this something where whomever wins this car can actually drive? Can you take it out? Can you enjoy it and use it? Or is it more of a museum piece because it's such a rare machine?
Well, no, I would say you could drive this car. It's an older restoration. It was restored probably 15 or 20 years ago, but it doesn't show. It's still beautiful. There's no paint chips. I mean, the thing is just shiny like brand new because it was tiptoed around on nice days. So, you don't see a lot of anything wrong with it anywhere. But you could continue that, just, drive it and take good care of the car, just like anything you drive. But insurance is your friend. You know, it's not
Yeah.
a survivor type car. So if you were to get in an accident, you know, and you insured it for what it's worth, it can be fixed. Anything can. It's not a big deal. So you're not really risking losing it. You know, it's not the Mona Lisa that if you scratch it, you can't fix it. So
Right. I'll tell you, it's just, it's, you know, it's interesting. An E-body is the only, well, I shouldn't say that. I've never owned an A-body and I've never owned an E-body. And I've always kind of wanted to. Now, obviously, I'm not buying this because, well, let's just say right now, you know, we're at the auction and it's already, it's got like 14 days or 13 days. It's at 150 grand. So obviously right now it's, you know, $149,000 out of my price range. So that ain't happening. But there are still, if you wanted to jump into an E-body, there are still somewhat affordable ones, right? You can still find a 318 car that is, I don't know if the 20s or the 30s is reasonable anymore.
You can
but
get them first. The 72 to 74 is a little more easy. The 70s, 71s are already getting a little spendy, even with a 318 probably.
yeah, the E-bodies are fast becoming six-figure cars no matter what you want.
Yeah.
I mean, it's happening fast. I've seen cars that just a couple of years ago I would have laughed at the prices they're asking, and they're sold in a day. And it's just amazing.
Wild.
And they're the pinnacle car. If you're going to a Mopar, I mean, not to interrupt you, Mike, but if you go to a Mopar, the first car people think of is Cuda or Charger.
Yeah.
Those are the cars that come to, you know, the average guy on the street that doesn't know cars very well. They know what a Cuda is, they know what a Charger is, or they think they do. And that alone, that awareness is what creates the value.
Yeah, I think that's true. Plus, I mean, just the fact that they look like they do. I think the E-body is one of the most beautiful styled cars ever to come out of Detroit. I mean, it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous machine.
And
where
71 has that very distinctive grille, you know, and the Nash bridges thing and all that stuff. And it's the last year of the true factory Hemi cars, right? To some degree.
Well, in perspective, think about it like this. In 1970, they built approximately 666 Hemi Cudas. 666. In 71, 107.
Yeah.
Right.
There's 5 times as many 70s, and 600 is not common.
No.
So you have a car that's in 71 more popular by, you know, the masses, and way fewer of them built. And, you know, the reason for that was we were coming to the end of the muscle car age, and the insurance value or the insurance costs, the gas crisis, all this stuff kind of came to a head that year, and people were looking more at a Dodge Colt than a Hemi Cuda. They wanted something that, you know, was more economical. Plus, you had the expense of a Hemi engine. You had a $4,000 car with an $800 engine in it. It was like a Hellcat is now, right?
Yeah.
So that's part of the reason they were so rare, is they were just coming to the end of their life, and, you know, they came to a peak as far as how great they looked. It was the best looking car in a lot of people's opinions, but the fewest made because of the circumstances in our world at that time.
Right. Well, let's move on, because I want to look at this. We have the other Cuda up here, which is a 1 of 5 71 convertible 446 pack car with a 4-speed in orange, with the shaker, with the billboards, black high back interior. I mean, it's just, this is another one. Like these two cars I look at and I'm like, somebody, like if you could walk into a dealer and just say, I want the 2 best Cudas ever.
Yeah, it's true.
Like this is what you would order, right? You would walk in and be like, I want one in snow white and I want one in orange and I want the shaker on both with the whomever ordered these cars knew exactly what they wanted, exactly what the combinations were supposed to be. And God, they just visually, they just knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, they're definitely bookend cars. You know, one of the first Hemi Cudas that I ever saw happened to be the Blake family's orange 71 Hemi Cuda convertible. You know that car, Mike?
I don't, off the top of my head, no.
If you Google it when we're done, you'll see it's very similar looking to this 6-pack car. It's orange, white billboards. It has an orange interior, which is striking, but otherwise they look very similar. It's an automatic car, and it's a Hemi, of course. But that car leaves an impression visually, right? It left one on me when I was a kid. And so when I saw this 6-pack car, it was, very distinctive. It looks very similar to that car. I immediately liked it just for that reason alone.
Right.
But what I came to realize later, and it's just total coincidence, is that a local racer here in Washington State, Dave Wren, he was a super stock racer back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Dave's still around. He lives over on Rob's side of the state. And he was telling me about this car a long time ago when I saw him up at Mission Raceway. And it kind of rung a bell, but he didn't know where it was, and I didn't either at the time. And I thought, wow, what a car that was. Well, it turned out Chrysler gave him this car to campaign. He was a sponsored racer, and he wanted to race it in a different class. So he got this brand new 6-pack Cuda convertible from Chrysler, pulled the 6-pack engine out of it, had a Hemi Cuda sitting there, took the Hemi out of it, put it in this car, and went racing.
It's wild.
So it was racing
with a roll bar, right? Because it was a convertible.
Yeah, it fitted a particular class, being a convertible, right?
Yeah.
And so he wanted the Hemi, he wanted it to be a convertible, and it was ordered specifically for that reason.
Interesting.
And it just a really unique car, and he did really well with the car for a while, and then he moved on and got a later model car after that. But I always wondered what happened to it, and of course it was found and restored. And Dave got in touch with Tom Limbeck, who's the current owner, and he had the original window sticker for the car, and he gave it to him. So it's really
That's
neat.
awesome.
Yeah.
So Tom Limbeck got this thing with just a few drag racing miles on it, and that was it, right?
Yeah, I think it had 14 miles showing on the odometer. So it was a brand new car. They pulled the engine, did the Hemi swap, and went racing. And they don't hook up the odometers in race cars, so we never know how many quarter miles the car had on it. It doesn't really matter. And then when he restored the car, he treated it like he was back in 1971 and just purchased this new car. And he plugged the odometer back in, and the miles that are on it are the actual miles that it's been street driven anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of a neat story, the way it came about. And a lot of people don't, they wonder, why are they so rare? Why are there only 17 total 71 6-pack Cuda convertibles? Well, I think the biggest reason for that is back in the day, convertibles weren't known to be the fastest version of whatever they were.
Yeah.
They'd go get a hardtop for that to go racing and go fast because they didn't twist as much and they weighed a little bit less. So that's the primary reason, plus the expense of a convertible too. So they were expensive. They weren't really practical. It was kind of an over-the-top engine combination for what it was. And so very few of them were ordered. And especially as a 4-speed, most convertibles are looked at as a luxury type car. You don't want to be shifting it, right?
Sure.
So they're just super rare. And then the shaker hood on top of that, they only built 3 of these with the shaker hood. That's it, as a 4-speed.
When these were built, what was it in regards to price comparison between other models? So, for instance, you had these beautiful e-bodies, right, that you could option with, convertible, hockey stripes, billboards, Hemis, the whole deal. In comparison to, say, an E-type of the era, right, or an SL Mercedes of the era, how much cheaper were these vehicles? How much, obviously people who are shopping Hemi Cuda convertibles are not shopping SL Mercedes at the same time. But do you think they were ever looked at in the same vein?
I don't know. I wasn't there, and I can't recite the sticker prices of those cars, to be honest with you. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I do know that the Hemi Cuda convertibles, when they were fully equipped, were in the realm of an expensive Corvette of the day. So, they were, between $5,000 and $6,000 was a lot of money for a new car back then. And most of those cars weren't new Cobras around 10,000 when they were brand new in the 60s.
Yeah. So, now they're 1 point whatever million,
Right. Everything is. So,
yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those things where I think you had a particular buyer for a particular car more so than shopping against each other. It's hard to say, but do you remember the Cornfield Cuda story? The 71 Hemi 4-speed Cuda that was out of Illinois?
No.
The gentleman that bought that car new, he was still the original owner when we met, Greg Peterson. He was an engineering student in high school, and he was doing really well. and he wanted to go off to college, and his father and grandparent were enthusiastic about that and that he was doing so well. So they wanted to reward him with a new car to go off to college in. And they said, well, grandfather had a Hemi DeSoto in the 50s, and your dad had a Stingray Corvette in the 60s. So we're going to let you go buy whichever one you want. And
Nice
he picked
family.
the Hemi Cuda. They were in the same value range, right? And he went ahead and ordered the Hemi Cuda, and he still had it. And it only had like 10,000 miles on it when he put it away. So,
Oh my God.
but there's stories like that relating to value and choices about different cars. That's why I brought that up. But that car's still out there.
Should we talk a little bit about Galen Govier's visit to these vehicles last week and what he found?
Galen Govier.
Sorry, got his name pronounced wrong.
That's okay.
And Scott, if you don't mind, could you give everybody a brief history on Galen and why he's the guy that he is, why everybody thinks that he's the last word?
Well, there's several people out there now that have a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of people that do. So you don't want to hang, all of that on one person. But what you can say about Galen is that he was one of the first to go out and document and research, all the different numbers and options and, basically how to figure out if this car was real or not. He was the guy you went to clear back into the late 70s and early 80s. And because of that, he's accumulated a plethora of information in his library of knowledge that no one else has. After he came around and people duplicated what he does, they can do a good job of it, but they'll never have that history that he has behind him. And I think that puts him at the forefront of being able to document a car, where there is other people that are totally capable, like David Wise and Frank Battleson. There's other people like that out there that can do the same type of work. But Galen is, it's pretty hard to beat when it comes to that. He does several types of inspections. He'll do a fender tag decoding through the mail or, through the internet. That's what, basically the light version of it is. But if you want the full boat, he'll actually fly to your location, and document your car and do a personal inspection, spend hours on it, going over every little nut and bolt, making sure that the car is, authentic. And that was just done by him about 2 weeks ago for both of these cars.
I'm going to have him do that to my Charger this way, and just to piss him off.
Well, he makes a special fender tag for that. It says, I, Galen Govier, guarantee that not one single nut or bolt on this car is authentic.
Perfect. That's exactly what I need.
So what was his finding on these two cars? Can you summarize it? Because I saw the reports, they're pretty extensive.
Yeah. Well, we know that the orange car lost its drivetrain early, and he documented that. And there's some other changes that it had, like it had tubs added, when it was a race car and a roll cage. And he documented that all that had been properly reversed with original sheet metal, and there's really no signs of it anymore. It's all been completely fixed. And on the white car, he documented that all the documentation is correct. All the numbers do match. All the stampings are authentic, factory stampings on everything. Pretty much what the ad says on the Hemmings. It's all true to form, and any prospective buyer has the ability to contact one of us, and we can provide them with that information if they want to see copies of it. It's not a problem.
Nice.
That's very cool. Yeah, these cars, both of them are just, I mean, they really are blue chip cars. They're two of the best in the world, both visually and I'm sure from a driving perspective. If you ever wanted to really understand what these cars were like to pilot and what they were like to pilot back in '71 when they were new. And again, I mean, if you are a collector, if this is something that you've always wanted to, you really need to look at them because they're stunning. I mean, if I had all the money in the world, I would bid on one because, like I said, I don't know what is your favorite one out of these two. I know what mine is, but what's your all favorite?
It's really hard to pick one for me. I'm a purist, so just because of the numbers matching status of the white car, I probably would choose that over the orange car, but not by much.
Okay.
I mean, it's pretty hard to beat a convertible in the color combination, and the drivetrain's awesome. It's just, I don't know.
It seems to me like with the white car, if you have a mixed collection of other muscle cars, that's the one to get. Like if you're not a pure Mopar guy, if you're a pure Mopar guy and wants the car that's just going to have that crazy shock value, especially at a show, rolling in with that orange convertible 446. I mean, everybody's going to stop what they're doing and walk over to that car because it's just bananas, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the white one's a little more subtle. The orange is like
It's
pretty
in your
out there.
face.
It's
It is, but here's the thing: like, there are some cars that just, they gravitate. They look better in certain colors, right? Like a white Charger, a white second gen Charger looks okay. Like, I don't particularly think it really complements the car. Where a white E-body to me just completely pops. I don't know why that is. I think, Scott, like you said, maybe it's that snow white color, that it is so pure and just so white. Oh my God. And like I said, I don't know if I've ever seen one. I'm in love with that thing. I think it is stunning. Stunning.
Yeah, I can't top that. I mean, it's an awesome car. In the course of a year's time, I get a lot of phone calls with people that, ask me if I've heard of something for sale or they're looking for.
Yeah.
Time and time again, the most common question I get is, do you know where I can find a 71 Hemi 4-speed car?
Really?
I mean, that's the most popular question. Like, I'm looking for a 71 Hemi Cuda. It's got to be a 4-speed, blah, blah, blah. Just like Tom was saying in the video that he shot. It's really true. I get that question all the time. Or I'll be selling an automatic car, and they'll be like, "Oh, I wish it was a 4-speed. I'd have bought it." It's like,
Scott, are people
you get
aware?
that it's just everybody, even though they don't drive these cars sometimes.
I know exactly.
They're like, a lot of these guys won't drive these cars. Personally, I would. I know Tom drives his cars on occasion, so they do get driven. So they're not undrivable, perfect show queens or anything. They're just really, really nice. And I don't know. The 4-speed part of it is cool. That the pistol grip and just connects you to the car, like we were talking about earlier.
Are most people aware when they do call you? Are they aware of like do you ever get somebody that calls and they're just like, "So, could you find me this thing? I've got like a $60,000 budget. We get into one." Like, are they aware? Like, and then do you just laugh at them and be like, "All right, let me tell you what's happening here."
No, I don't. People are more educated than a lot of people believe. They know what they're after, and they know the approximate values of these cars. The one thing though that they don't realize a lot of times is that you can't go back in time and order a specific car the way you want it to be. Oh, I wish it had this, or I wish it didn't have that, is the most common conversation that goes along with those questions. It's like, dude, I don't have a time machine. Doesn't work like that. There's this many of these were built, this many are for sale or available at any price, and these are your choices or your one choice, and it's going to cost this much, and that's just how it is. If you want to be a member of that club, this is the price you pay.
You made me think of that Hemi Cuda convertible that we sold about 8 or 9 months ago, and I think it went for $150. And even for $150, to your point, Scott, I don't think you could build that car for that.
No.
Are you talking about the clone?
Yeah, the clone.
Okay.
Like a pure clone. Like, to your point, like if somebody wanted to build their car, that's still gonna cost
cheap.
It's still gonna cost them a lot of money.
The thing I've heard from several people in the past is it costs the same amount of money, give or take, based on a few differences between models, to restore a Slant 6 Valiant or a 440 Cuda. I mean, the price of paint, the price of suspension, the price of interior, all those things plus labor in today's economy with everything going up like crazy, and then getting things have elevated the cost of a restoration to the point where you better have a pretty big wallet if you're going to you buy a car done, you're way ahead than going out and spending the money to get.
I tell people that all the time, and they look at me like I've got 16 heads, right? Like well, they haven't been through it. And I have a friend that was said, I'd like to get into an E-body. He's looking for a Challenger right now. And he's like, I'd like to get into a Challenger. And I think I can restore one. I'm like, well, what's your budget? And he's like, well, I could probably throw 40 grand at it. I'm like, quadruple that, because and he looks at me, he's like, well, that's not true. And I go, it is 100% true. And for some, and I always go back to Look at the average price of a new car. It's $40,000, the average price of a new car. Okay. Now, this is something that is factory fresh. Everything works, blah, 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 blah. You're taking something that is going on 60 years old, and you're trying to make it, quote unquote, factory fresh with parts that are unobtainium, right? And again, I don't know why people refuse to believe what things cost nowadays, but for some reason, it's just, I feel like they do. And then when you have somebody that knows what they're talking about and says, well, no, this is the actual cost, they almost get offended. It's almost like you're telling them that they can't afford it. And it's like, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is readjust your expectations as to what you're going to spend, because you are so far out of whack on what your thinking is.
You know, the term "don't shoot the messenger" comes to mind a lot.
Yeah.
Because you can be the bad guy giving people news they don't want to hear, even though it's factual, good information. A lot of times people just don't want to hear it. They want to be told that their idea is a great idea and go right ahead. You want to, be their buddy, but
Yeah.
I'm a little more pessimistic. So sometimes they don't hear what they want to hear, but you're right, 100% right. And that's why when somebody comes to me that's a true friend and they say, hey, just like you said with a Challenger, hey, I want a Cuda or Charger or whatever they want, Duster, pick one. What's it going to cost me? And I'm like, well, what do you want? Well, that project car you got out in the side yard, I'd like to buy that for $2,000 or $3,000, and I'll work on it over time. And I'm like, I'll sell you my parts car, but you're not my enemy. You will be once you get it.
Right.
You're going to realize pretty quick that you just jumped into some deep water. And when that 318 Duster is all done and you have 80,000 in it and it's worth 25, you're going to be mad at me. And I said, I'd rather tell you the truth. Go to the auctions or, go online and find a car that meets everything you want and go to the bank and get a loan and buy the thing.
Yeah.
No matter
Right.
what. If you can afford the payment, just buy it. And the reason I tell them that is that, first of all, somebody else has taken a beating on the car because they restored it. and you're going to come out, if you sell it and take good care of it, pretty much where you're starting with. You're going to get your money back at some point and you'll get some enjoyment out of it. But the biggest thing you get by buying a car that's finished is you get it right now.
Mm-hmm.
Look at that thing behind me now. I bought that car 2 years ago. Okay.
All right, go into this, because what
the
Scott's talking about
Nerdmobile.
right now is the Nerdmobile.
Okay,
What is the Nerdmobile? Talk us through.
Okay, so
Awesome.
You ever heard the term happy wife, happy life?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, my wife is not a car person. And so, and as you look behind me, you'll see that there's a lot of car stuff, everywhere you look. And she puts up with that, right? So the one time I could talk her into going to a good guy's car show with me to walk around, because she had no interest whatsoever. We're walking around and this thing's parked there and it's got cop lights all over it and a guy in uniform standing there because he was good looking. That didn't hurt. And so we're walking around this car and she goes, I really like this.
Excuse me? Say what now?
She loves the car. So I said, okay, well, here's how that works. Sir, I'd like to buy your car. So I bought it on the spot. It was cheap. I mean, I'll tell you, I paid $4,000 for it.
That's
amazing.
Yeah. So I bought the car and we drove around in it and she likes it, but it's a 273 on its last leg. It's really anemic. I mean, if it has 80 horsepower, I'd be surprised. And it's got the whole tune up. It's just got 1 billion miles on it. It's a local Spokane car. An old lady had it. It was sold new here in town. It was originally beige with a tan interior. So this police officer local bought it, painted it black and dolled it up like a cop car so it looks the part. And it's just a kind of a neat old beater, it runs and drives nice.
Yeah.
I am not the kind of person to leave stuff alone. So
For those who aren't watching, Scott is now walking off into the distance and wheeling a rebuilt big block into the foreground to show us how he cannot leave anything alone. Complete new Mopar blue paint, the chrome valve covers, big ass carb on top. Scott, what are we looking at now that you are shoehorning into the Nerdmobile?
That over there is a 440 HP.
There you go.
Again, it's a clone too, because it's a 69 out of a 69 RT Charger that I found locally. And built it up to look like a 67. So what this is going to be is something that the factory never produced, which was an L code, meaning a 440 high performance engine in a 1967 Belvedere 4-door cop car. So
That's awesome.
it's sort of something they should have built, but they didn't, not that I know of. And that's how we're going to drive it around. It's just stock, 375 horse, nothing special, just fun to cruise around.
I heard you're going to have some teenagers put this all together.
This is my young guns project. I don't have any of my own kids. My wife and I've got a step kid named Trevor, really good kid. Not a car guy, but we're going to see if we can change that a little bit. We're going to get him over here. And a good friend of mine, Frank Perry, who's lucky enough to own a 68 Hemi Roadrunner here in town.
Nice.
A couple teenage kids that are really enthusiastic. And we're going to get them involved in doing the engine swap. So basically, Frank and I are going to sit here and drink beer and supervise while they do all the dirty work.
That sounds perfect.
I
So
think it's awesome,
what transmission and what rear ends in this thing?
It's an 8 3/4, 323, I believe. It's never done a burnout. Doesn't have the power to, so I don't know if it's a sure grip yet. I could jack it up and find out, but we'll see. It's a 727 with a B&M pole shot torque converter, like 2400 stall, nothing special.
Yeah.
Shift kit, it'll run basically like a stock 67 GTX.
That's great. I think that's
so
perfect.
cool.
Yeah, just a fun beater. If I ever get crazy, I'll put some more power to it, but right now it's fine.
Well, I mean, when you think about that, right? When you say, it's a basically stock 440, 375 horsepower, but they made close to 500 pound-feet of torque, didn't they?
Oh yeah, they're no joke. I mean, this thing will roast the tires all the way down the street. It's not a Hemi,
Right.
but it's knocking on the door. They're pretty stout package altogether.
I mean, I know that, it's really interesting. Like I know the 440 in my 68 Charger, that thing is a stump puller, and that's got 70,000 FU miles on it that I personally put on. And everybody's like, what have you done to the motor? What have you done to the motor? And I'm like, cast iron 906 heads, stock rockers, stock push rods. I have literally changed the oil and beat the crap out of it for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And they don't break. That's the thing. Like I always laugh when everybody's like, you're going to put, aluminum heads and you're going to put these pistons on. I go, first off, where am I going? Right. Where am I going? Right. If I can sit there and without power braking or doing anything and just slam my foot to the floor and start whipping donuts, I'm a happy man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Simple man. I don't need more than that.
This engine is factory stock.
That's awesome.
The heads have never been off of it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It was in a local guy had it in a rat rod, like a 37 DeSoto with the roof chopped off and stuff. And I'm at that. Okay, this is the weird part. The same show that I bought this car at, right? It's like 2-3 years ago, whenever it was. The same show, I saw that rat rod sitting there in the show field with its 440 engine, and I'm like, wait a minute. Because, they usually have a small block Chevy in them or whatever beat up piece of crap they stuck in them. And I look over there, I'm like, that's an original 440. And I look at the ID pad, and it's got, E440 HP stamped on. I'm like, that's a 69 HP 440. It's still got original orange paint on it. It's all flaking off.
Right.
And he sticks it in this rat rod like it's a piece of crap. Like, I look, it's got a Charger VIN on it, which is out there on the internet, by the way. If anybody knows the car, this engine will come out of that car and go back to that Charger.
Nice.
That's cool.
That. So I'm all about that, helping out the next guy get his numbers right. So, I won't hurt it. Anyway, car's probably long gone.
I'll preface that and I'll just say, and it won't be for free though.
Well,
it's not going to be for free.
I'm not going to hold it ransom. Maybe get me another 440. That.
There you go.
Okay.
Just make it right. I don't do that. So, anyway, the guy called me off a Craigslist ad. I was looking for one, and it was the same guy that I saw at the show 3 years ago where I bought the car, and I get the engine out of it. And I have video of the thing running, so I know it runs good, but I put, new timing chain, all the teeth were falling off, the nylon teeth wear out after 50 years. So they were all laying in the bottom of the pan, and I got all that stuff taken care of, new timing chain and oil pump and pickup. And it's basically just a bare long block that I put all new stuff on. But
that's very, very cool.
Yeah.
So what is the plan for the Nerdmobile? Is it just straight beater, just drive around, enjoy it, not worry about it, and have fun?
Pretty much at this point. My biggest thing is, again, my wife wanted it and liked it, so we bought that for a fun thing we could both enjoy, which is the reason a lot of people buy cars, classic cars. Something to,
Totally.
get the family together and have some fun. And that's kind of my thing. I've got nicer cars, but if I get a paint chip in one of them, like my Duster or my GTX, it'd kill me, right? this thing I could go down the freeway and collect a rock, and I'm not going to be bothered with it too much. It's like, okay, so what? It's a $4,000 car, whoop-de-dee, right? So, but yeah, that's my plan for, I wanted a family thing. And then the new thing with the young guns thing, I want to get those kids into this. I think it's important that we get our youth involved in these cars because we're a bunch of old graybeards and we don't want it to disappear with us, right? So to further that, I got Frank and his kids. One of them's 15, one's 16, I think, and they're just all over this. They're having a good old time.
That's great.
So when are you going to start that? And is there any documentation on that? As far as like, are you going to record anything or take photos? Because here's the thing, and I totally agree with you in regards to getting, young kids in that. What I would like to do, and we'll talk to Nick, who's our producer, about putting more on. I would love to get you and the kids on the podcast and have them talk about their experience and what it's like. I think we need to do that. We need to do that. That would be really cool.
I'll get the GoPro set up and we'll take some video of, action shots of us doing the whole thing. And, we'll let you guys play with it. I'll just give you the raw footage and you can do it.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, they're enthused about that. They like the social media aspect of it. They like the attention, which, who doesn't? When you're a kid, especially, that's what it's all about, right? They want to be known and recognized and do something fun. And they're really good kids. So it'll be a fun time for sure.
What do they think of that? Now, there's approximately 6 or 7 people on the planet who like this body style, the 66 to 67s. And I know, Scott, you're one of them. What do they, I mean, it looks like a box.
Well, let's go back in time. Remember that first car that I saw my dad showed me and said, hey, that's Hemi?
Yep.
Yeah.
It was a boxy 66 Satellite, which at the time, I'm Grandpa Mobile.
And I've owned one of those for 12 years.
Yeah. Well, then my first Hemi car just so happened I bought here in Spokane, had a 440 in it, but it was a Hemi car. It was a 67 GTX, which is still around, by the way, and in the hands of the original owner and restored, which is cool. Carl Patterson, California. It was a silver car. Anyway, that was my first performance car that I ever owned, really. And that car was so fun to drive. I had so much fun in it and got in so much trouble and drag raced. Once you've connected to a car like that, the body style is more appealing to you.
Of course.
And the same kind of thing goes like 66 Chargers, 67 Chargers. A lot of people don't like them because they're just not aesthetically a Cuda, let's say.
Yeah.
But once you drive one and you realize what a great car it is, they grow on you pretty quick. They've got a full center console in the interior that's really luxurious. They've got a really nice gauge layout.
Awesome gauge layout.
They drive
66,
really nice.
67 Chargers.
Coolest
honestly, my favorite interior of the muscle car era.
Yeah.
My barn on favorite interior. Yeah.
They're amazing cars. So it's one of those, in passing, they don't maybe grab your eye, but if you actually live with one, same thing with these boxy 4-doors, right?
Yeah.
If you've driven one and owned one and enjoyed it a little bit, you like them. They're real likable cars. And they're less, like the later cars, like the Chargers, like your Charger, Mike, the 68, 970 Chargers, and E-bodies too. They're more bulbous cars.
Absolutely.
And so when you're in the car, you don't feel as visually connected. Like I'm a small guy. I'm only 5'6". When I'm sitting in a Cuda, I can barely see over the steering wheel. And it's hard to see the corners of the car when you're driving it a little bit for me, which is why I like the 6-way seat option, because it lifts you up and you can see over the thing and then it's fine.
But, you need a phone book.
That's what my mom uses. She's 4'8". Yeah, that's where I got my massive height from. So
that's awesome.
It's awesome. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let me ask. Let me ask you guys this: if you had to have one Mopar, could you narrow it down, and what would it be? What is your all-time favorite? But like, you're gonna buy it, you're gonna keep it, you're not gonna worry about paint chips and shit. You're just gonna enjoy it and drive it. What would it be? And how would you option your car?
Mine's easy. You know it. 68 Roadrunner. It's my birth year, and get the most basic taxi cab one out there. But I do like power steering and power brakes, so I'd probably want that.
What color?
Oh, just triple green, barf green, and I want the post car. Yeah, that's what I want. This is the ugliest one possible.
What about you, Scott?
I can't answer that.
Really? Really?
I'm sitting here the whole time Rob was talking. I'm like, how do I pick one of those cars? I can't. That's why I have a Duster and a GTX and a Cuda.
Yeah.
Who can make that choice? I mean,
Yeah, it's hard.
It's day of the week. That's the same thing as, one time I had a custom car. Don't tell anybody. But the custom car was a certain color, and I got in an accident. Guy hit me in a parking lot, and I wanted to get it painted, and I had a full excuse to pay for the whole paint job. And now was the time to change the color. And I went to the body shop, and the guy says, okay, what color are we painting this thing? Same color or something different? And I'm like, something different. And he goes, well, what do you want? And I picked a color, and I forget what it was. And he says, now go home and wait 4 days. That's what he said. He said,
that's a smart guy.
He said, every day you wake up, write down the color you want the car to be. And I'm like, are you serious right now? He goes, he's absolutely serious.
I love that.
I can't touch the car till next week anyway, right? Like that.
I love that.
And I'm like, okay. So I went home, and the next morning I woke up, and I'm like, gee, I don't know. Today I like green. And the next day I woke up, and the weather changed, and now I like yellow. And I'm not kidding you. My mind changed 4 times before I figured out what I wanted, and I stuck with what it was painted already,
which was
burgundy.
So, burgundy.
Yeah, it was a 240Z.
Oh, is this the one that
awesome.
you had 3 wrecks in?
Yeah, in a month.
Yeah, that's
wow.
that's the whole podcast.
Whole nother story.
Story.
Don't want to go there. Great car.
That's awesome. I think that's very. It's funny. I know. When you have something for so long, like I've had the Charger, my 68, going on 20 years at this point, which is the longest I've ever owned anything, right? And I still, like, people ask me, they're like, if something ever, God forbid, happened to that car, would you get another Charger? And my answer is no.
Yeah.
I wouldn't because it's not that car.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And people always say, well, and then there are parts of it that look dated, like the wheels look dated, and they were like, will you ever change the wheels? And I go, probably not, because it's not that car anymore. And it's interesting. I think a lot of people now, they look at the cars and they don't hold on to them. They don't have experiences in them and things like that. And that's why I like the Nerdmobile so much, because I have a feeling you're going to have that car for a long time, because part of you, I feel like, you just don't care. You're like, it's $4,000. I can take it anywhere. And if something happens, it doesn't matter. And the cars that you don't care about, or that you not don't care about, but just enjoy for the sake of enjoyment's sake, I have a feeling that car is going to be with you for a long time, dude. I really do. I think it's cool as hell.
Sorry, I'm having computer issues.
Plus, he coined a good name for it.
Oh, well, it's best name ever.
I mean, it's a 4-door Belvedere. What else do you call it? I mean,
it's like the Volvo 240D of its day.
Belvedere, come here, boy. Remember that?
That's very, very cool. That's very cool. Well, I'll tell you guys, we're coming up on, actually, we're over an hour, which is pretty impressive, talking about Mopars, which is awesome. I will say this to everybody out there in podcast world: if you are looking for a couple of Cudas, because if you're looking for a couple, why not come in and buy both? Because they're both on auction and they're both amazing. But we're talking about, matching numbers, 71 Hemi Cuda with a 4-speed in snow white with a shaker, billboards. It's about as good as it gets. And another, obviously, 71 Cuda, right? Convertible 446-pack 4-speed car. These are 2 of the best looking Cudas that I've ever seen. We're just fortunate to have them up on auction. If you have questions about these cars, ask us and we'll give you answers. Not like BS answers, but real answers to the cars, because since the cars are so special and since they're so well documented, it really is our job to provide you with the correct information. So feel free to let us know about that. Otherwise, like I said, welcome to 2022. Shocked that it's already here. Rob, thank you so much for coming on. Scott, it is always a pleasure to talk to you. And I think, obviously, the next time we got to talk about the Young Guns thing that you're doing and talk about and get the kids on the podcast that are going to play with the Nerdmobile, because I think that's amazing. Otherwise, you guys got anything else before we cap this?
I think we're good, Mike.
Yeah.
Appreciate your help today and involving us, and it's been awesome.
Awesome. Okay, well, like I said, coming up in the future, we'll talk about Young Guns, more about the Nerdmobile and how the Young Guns like playing with that thing. So, everyone, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod BBQ podcast. As always, check out our classifieds, check out our auctions, where the Cudas sit right now, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod BBQ podcast and hit that subscribe button, and we'll come to you every week.